The smell of bleach lingered in the air as Hannah wiped her brow, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the rag tighter. The faint scent of luxury seemed to be soaked into every corner of the hotel room, mixing with the industrial scent of cleaning supplies. The weight of the day's tasks bore down on her, cleaning rooms for people who probably didn't even know she existed. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers in the lobby, the polished wood, their world felt so far removed from her own. They walked past her as if she were invisible, like part of the backdrop, unnoticed and unimportant. And that's how she liked it. She was the maid, the help, and she was meant to blend into the background. Hannah had been working at the hotel for over 2 years now, and in all that time she had learned to accept that she was just a shadow in the vast, gleaming machine that was the world of the wealthy. She cleaned, she dusted, she scrubbed, and then she disappeared, never staying in one place long enough to be remembered. It was a hard life, one she'd become accustomed to, but it was the only life she knew. That morning had started like any other. She had entered the suite of James Turner, the well-known billionaire, just as she did every week, dusting, vacuuming, making sure everything was spotless before moving on to the next task. She was efficient, quick, and as unobtrusive as possible. Most of the time, the guests barely noticed her. In fact, James Turner was one of those men who never seemed to notice her at all. He was always surrounded by assistants, business partners, and other high-profile figures. He barely spent a minute in his room before he was off to the next meeting, the next event. She'd never spoken to him, never even exchanged a word until that day. As she dusted the nightstand, a strange sound caught her attention. The voices from the adjoining room were hushed but sharp, their tones laced with an underlying tension that made her stop in her tracks. Hannah froze, rag still in hand, trying to make out the words. It wasn't uncommon to overhear conversations between guests, but there was something different about this one. Something about it felt off. Her curiosity got the better of her, and without thinking, she moved closer to the door, her heart racing as she listened intently. The voice that emerged from the other room sent a chill down her spine. It was a woman's voice, but it sounded cold, detached. It was unmistakably Amanda Turner, James Turner's wife, the woman she had seen in passing a few times. "We'll make sure the trip is the last one he ever takes," Amanda whispered, her voice dripping with malice. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. She froze, the rag slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor with a soft thud. The words echoed in her head. The last one he ever takes? Who was she talking about? What were they planning? Her mind raced, but before she could process it all, a low voice responded from the other side of the door, one she didn't recognize. It was deep and chilling, the kind of voice that could freeze your blood. "Don't worry, he'll never see it coming." Hannah's pulse quickened, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The conversation had taken a dark turn. A plot was unfolding right behind that door, and she was the only one who knew about it. Amanda and her accomplice, whoever he was, were planning something terrible, something dangerous. Her hands were clammy as she pressed her ear to the door, her mind working in overdrive. She couldn't make sense of it all, but one thing was clear. They were talking about James Turner, and the mention of the trip. It was no ordinary business trip. Something much darker was at play. The voices continued, but this time, they were even more chilling. Amanda's voice rose, colder and more menacing. "We need to be careful. One slip-up, and everything's ruined," she said, her words sharp with danger. Ryan, the man she hadn't recognized, responded, his voice low and flat. "I'll handle it. Don't worry," he said, his tone unwavering. Everything inside Hannah screamed at her to leave, to pretend she hadn't heard anything and simply walk away. It was easy to keep her head down and go back to her cleaning. But something held her there. Fear, curiosity, or perhaps a sense of responsibility she had never felt before. She didn't know, but she couldn't move. She couldn't just ignore what she had heard. They were planning something terrible, and she was the only one who knew about it. Her breath quickened as she pulled away from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to do something, but what? What could she do? Who would believe her? She was just the maid. No one cared about her. She was invisible to people like Amanda and her accomplice. Even if she told someone, they would never take her seriously. The weight of the secret pressed on her chest, suffocating her. She had to warn James Turner. He had to know. But how could she get to him? Hannah walked back through the suite, trying to keep her mind focused on the task at hand. Her hands shook as she finished dusting the room, her movements automatic, but her mind was reeling. She thought of the danger James was in. She thought of the evil that Amanda was planning. Hannah had always known that the wealthy lived in a different world, but this was something else entirely. This was murder, a betrayal, a life on the line. By the time she finished cleaning, her decision was made. She couldn't stay silent. No matter the risk, she had to warn him. She couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. Later that evening, Hannah sat alone in the employee lounge, sipping the bitter coffee that seemed to be the only thing keeping her grounded. Her thoughts kept circling back to the conversation she had overheard. The plan was clear. Amanda and her accomplice were going to kill James Turner. They were going to make it look like an accident, a tragic mishap on a routine business trip. But Hannah knew the truth. She had heard it with her own ears. And now, she had to act. But how? She had to warn him, but how could she do it without getting herself into even more danger? What if Amanda found out she had overheard them? What if they came after her? The fear gnawed at her, but she couldn't ignore the voice inside her that told her to act, to do something. The next morning, when James Turner arrived at the hotel lobby, Hannah spotted him immediately. His presence was commanding, unmistakable, surrounded by his usual entourage, his bodyguards, his assistants. He moved with purpose, as though the world around him was just a blur. But for Hannah, he wasn't just another wealthy guest. He was the man who was about to be murdered, and she was the only one who knew. Her heart raced as she approached him, rehearsing what she would say in her mind. She had one chance to warn him. She had to make him listen. When she reached him, she cleared her throat, her voice shaky but determined. "Mr. Turner?" she called out, surprising herself with the force behind her words. James turned to face her, his brow furrowing as he took in the sight of her. She could feel his eyes scanning her, trying to place her. He was probably used to seeing the staff, his assistants, his security, the people who helped run his empire. But a maid? She probably didn't even register in his world. Still, she pressed on. "I need to tell you something about your trip," she said, her voice a little firmer now, though it still trembled. "You shouldn't go. Something's not right." James raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And why should I trust you?" he asked, his voice cold, detached. His eyes lingered on her name tag for a moment, his expression unreadable. Hannah swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making it almost impossible to speak. What could she say? She was just the maid, but she had to warn him. She had to get through to him. She leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice. "I can't explain everything. Just trust me on this. Please." She glanced around nervously, making sure no one else was listening. For a long moment, James didn't speak, his eyes narrowing as though trying to decipher whether she was a genuine warning or just another hotel employee spouting nonsense. The tension between them hung thick in the air, but then, just as she thought he was going to dismiss her completely, he straightened up and said, "I'll think about it." His voice was cold and dismissive, but for some reason the words hit Hannah like a wave of relief. At least he had listened. At least he had heard her. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of bustling hotel guests and staff. Hannah stood there, frozen in place, feeling both defeated and relieved. She had done it. She had warned him. Now it was up to him to decide what to do with the information. As she watched him disappear, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. As the day wore on, Hannah couldn't focus. Her mind replayed the brief interaction with James Turner over and over again, trying to decipher the meaning behind his reaction. Had he believed her warning, or had he brushed it off as the ramblings of a frightened maid? She couldn't be sure. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but one thing was clear. She had done all she could. There was nothing more she could do unless James decided to act on the warning. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She cleaned and tidied with mechanical precision, her hands moving on autopilot while her thoughts remained fixated on the conversation, She tried to push the nagging fear from her mind, but it lingered. What if she hadn't been convincing enough? What if Amanda and her accomplice were already planning their next move? That evening, as she returned to her small, cramped apartment, Hannah felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders. The noise of the city outside, the honking of car horns, and the chatter of pedestrians on the street barely registered. It was all so distant, so irrelevant to the chaos swirling in her mind. She entered her apartment and locked the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment, trying to catch her breath. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Turner received your warning. He's canceled the trip. Thank you for your help." The message was brief, but sent a wave of relief through her. She hadn't expected a response, let alone confirmation that her warning had been heard and acted upon. Still, something about the message unsettled her. Who was it from? How did they know what had transpired between her and James? The mystery of it made her stomach turn. Had someone been watching her? She pushed the thought aside, trying to focus on the positive. James was safe, for now. But that relief was short-lived as her mind turned to the next terrifying question. What would Amanda and her accomplice do now? The next morning, as Hannah stepped out of her building, she froze in her tracks. Parked outside was a sleek black car, far too expensive for the modest neighborhood she lived in. The car gleamed under the morning sun, almost out of place in the middle of the rundown street with its cracked sidewalks and old brick buildings. Her heart began to race. Who would be driving such a car in her neighborhood? And more importantly, who were they waiting for? Her stomach churned as her eyes searched the street for any sign of the driver. She was hesitant to move forward, considering going back inside to avoid whatever was coming, but before she could make a decision, the driver stepped out of the car. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, adjusting his hat as he locked the car behind him. The moment he locked eyes with her, Hannah's heart skipped a beat. There was no mistaking it. He was here for her. The man walked toward her, his steps measured, deliberate. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. She couldn't move, her body frozen under the intensity of his gaze. He reached her, his hand pulling out an envelope, the crisp white paper gleaming in his hand. "This is for you," he said, his voice calm and direct. Hannah's hand trembled as she took the envelope, her eyes darting between the man and the car. Her throat went dry. "Who sent this?" she managed to whisper. The man smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "Mr. Turner," he replied simply. "He wanted to make sure you got it." Her mind raced as she stared at the envelope, but the man had already turned, walking back to the car. She stood there for a moment, her heart still pounding. Mr. Turner? What was going on? Why had he sent someone to her apartment? With a shaking hand, Hannah opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single note, written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for your concern. I've decided to cancel the trip. Enclosed is something I believe you'll find useful." Hannah pulled out a key. It was small, plain, and attached to a simple silver keychain. The engraving read, "Wilshire Towers." Hannah's brow furrowed as she stared at the key. Wilshire Towers. It sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized what it must be. An upscale apartment building downtown, a place far beyond anything she could afford. But why was James Turner giving her this? What was his real intention behind all this? Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. Another message, this time from an unknown number again. "Your new place is ready. Welcome to a fresh start, JW." Hannah's mind spun. A fresh start? What did it mean? She barely knew James Turner. They had spoken once for a brief moment, and now he was offering her an apartment. Why? What was the catch? Her heart raced as she sat down at her kitchen table, staring at the key in her hand. Her life had never been anything but modest. Barely scraping by, struggling to make rent, and now this. A luxury apartment, a life she had never imagined. She couldn't bring herself to believe it. It didn't feel real. It felt like a dream, one that she couldn't wake up from. Was this really happening? Later that day, Hannah made her way to the address on the key. Wilshire Towers was even more impressive in person than she had imagined. The towering building loomed over the city, its glass facade reflecting the light of the fading day. Hannah stood at the entrance for a moment, taking it all in. It was beautiful, yes, but it didn't feel like it was meant for someone like her. Inside, the lobby was pristine, with sleek marble floors and high ceilings. She walked through it with wide eyes, trying to absorb it all, but it didn't feel like it belonged to her. She was just a maid. This was the kind of place she had cleaned, the kind of place she had always dreamed about, but never thought she would be allowed to step foot in. The doorman greeted her politely, and after a moment of hesitation, she handed him the key. He entered something into the security system and then handed the key back to her, gesturing toward the elevator. "You're all set, miss. The elevator to your right will take you to your floor," he said, his smile polite, almost practiced. Hannah nodded, but as she walked toward the elevator, the sense of unease only grew. She stepped inside, the doors closing behind her with a soft whoosh. The elevator ride felt interminable, each floor passing with a steady chime. Her pulse quickened with each passing second, and by the time the doors opened to her floor, her hands were shaking. The apartment was just as luxurious as she had imagined. It was large, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering an expansive view of the city. The hardwood floors gleamed under the recessed lighting, and everything from the sleek kitchen appliances to the modern furniture seemed so foreign. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also cold, unwelcoming. Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't meant for someone like her. She wandered through the apartment, fingers brushing against the smooth surfaces of the counters, the soft fabric of the couch. The beauty of it all made her feel small, insignificant. She had lived her whole life just scraping by, never imagining she would be in a place like this. But now that she was here, it felt wrong. It didn't feel like home. It was like being caught in someone else's dream, someone else's world. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was another message from the mysterious number. "Your new life starts today. Take your time. JW." Her mind swirled. Her new life? Hannah's chest tightened. How could she take her time? Everything had changed overnight, and she didn't even know if she wanted it. She had always lived with a certain level of struggle, and while part of her longed for this luxury, another part felt like a stranger in this opulent space. She had nothing in common with the world that had just opened up to her dot. The next few days passed in a blur. Hannah spent her time wandering through the apartment, trying to make sense of her new life, but nothing felt familiar. The furniture, the modern fixtures, the view of the city, everything screamed wealth, power, and a world she didn't understand. But despite everything, there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind, the sense of unease she couldn't shake. What was James Turner's real motive? What had she gotten herself into? And what did Amanda, his wife, think of all this? Hannah had overheard her plotting James's murder. She couldn't forget the cold, venomous words she had heard. She had helped James, but it seemed like every step forward brought her deeper into something dangerous. She hadn't heard from James again since that brief interaction in the lobby. She didn't know where she stood with him. Did he truly care for what she did, or had it been a passing thank you? Could she trust him? Or was he just another powerful man who had used her for his own ends? One afternoon, as Hannah sat in the living room, her thoughts swirling in 1,000 directions, there was a knock at the door. She froze. Who could it be? She hadn't expected any visitors. As her heart raced, she approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. She was met with the familiar sight of Detective Martinez, the officer who had been involved in James's investigation. Without thinking, Hannah unlocked the door and opened it, standing face to face with the detective. "Detective Martinez?" she asked, her voice slightly shakier than she intended. Martinez gave her a polite nod. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, letting him in. As he crossed the threshold, his eyes scanned the apartment, taking in the luxurious surroundings with the same professional detachment he had shown during their previous encounters. "I didn't expect you," Hannah said, a bit breathless. "Is something wrong?" Martinez's expression softened, though there was an unmistakable seriousness in his demeanor. "I have some updates for you, Hannah, some things you need to know." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. What now? The unease she'd been feeling all week flared up again. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martinez took a deep breath, then spoke. "James Turner isn't the only one at risk here. Amanda is involved in something much bigger, something you're connected to, and we need your help to stop her." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't expected this. She had thought that warning James had been enough. She had thought that after hearing her message, things would be over. But this was much worse than she had imagined. Martinez continued, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Amanda is part of a larger criminal network, one that spans far beyond just her family's dealings. It involves embezzlement, fraud, and possibly even more dangerous activities. James has been investigating her for months, but he's only scratched the surface. Your warning helped him uncover more, but it also drew you into this." Hannah felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She was in deeper than she ever could have imagined. She had overheard a murder plot, sure, but the implications of what Martinez was saying were staggering. Her father's death, Amanda's involvement, everything was interconnected, tangled in a web of lies and corruption. "I didn't ask for this," Hannah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to help." "I know," Martinez replied, his expression softening. "But now, you're the key to everything. We need you to help us bring Amanda down. We have the evidence now, but we need someone to testify, someone who knows her intimately." Hannah recoiled. Testify? She was just the maid. She had no place in a courtroom, no place in this world of high-stakes crime. But she also knew one thing. She couldn't back down. She'd already risked too much to turn back now. "What do you need from me?" Hannah asked, her voice firm despite the panic clawing at her insides. She had to act. She had to do something to stop Amanda before it was too late. "We need you to help us get the rest of the evidence," Martinez explained. "James can't do this alone. Amanda is always one step ahead, but with your help, we can corner her. We can expose everything she's done. It's the only way to stop her." Hannah nodded, feeling a wave of determination wash over her. She had been invisible for too long. She wasn't going to let Amanda's web of lies and murder claim any more innocent lives. Not her father's, not anyone else's. "I'll help," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "But I need to know one thing. Is James safe? Will he be okay?" Martinez hesitated for a moment, his expression unreadable. "For now, yes, but we're running out of time. We can't let Amanda slip away." That night, as Hannah sat on her balcony, staring out at the city skyline, she reflected on the chaos that had become her life. In just a few days, everything had changed. She was no longer the invisible maid, scrubbing floors and blending into the background. She was part of something much bigger, something more dangerous. And for the first time, she had a voice. A knock on her door startled her, and when she opened it, she found James standing there. His eyes were tired, his posture stiff, but there was something softer about him now, something that hadn't been there the first time she'd met him. "I need to talk to you," James said, his voice low, his gaze intense. "There's more to this than you know." Hannah's heart raced. What else could there be? Hannah felt a chill run down her spine as James stepped into the apartment, his presence filling the space. She shut the door quietly behind him, her heart racing with anticipation. What could he possibly need to tell her? The unease from earlier was now a palpable tension hanging in the air. James walked over to the large windows, looking out at the city with an unreadable expression. He seemed lost in thought for a moment before turning back to her. "Hannah," he began, his voice firm but laced with a hint of something more vulnerable. "There's something you need to understand. Everything that's happened, goes deeper than just Amanda and her plot. It's about your father. It's always been about your father." Her breath caught in her throat. Her father. After everything that had happened, she never expected to hear his name again, especially not in relation to James Turner and the mess she had unwittingly become entangled in. "What do you mean?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the words settling in her chest. She felt like she was about to unravel something that had been hidden for far too long. James paused, his jaw tightening. Your father and I, we were close when we were young. Very close. We grew up together, like brothers. His voice faltered slightly, but he continued. I didn't realize it until recently, but your father was involved in something much bigger than I ever knew. And I think it's tied to everything that's happening now. Hannah shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. Her father had always been a mystery to her. He had passed away when she was just a child, leaving her and her mother to fend for themselves. He had never mentioned James, never mentioned any friends from his past. To hear that her father had been involved in something big, something connected to all of this, was almost too much to bear. What are you saying? She asked, her voice trembling. Are you saying my father was involved in this, in all of this? That he knew Amanda? That he was involved in her family's crimes? James walked toward her, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. Yes. Your father was trying to expose something that Amanda's family was involved in. Financial fraud, corruption, money laundering, all of it. Your father had evidence that could have taken them down, but he was silenced before he could do anything with it. Hannah felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. All these years she had thought her father's death was an accident, but now James was telling her that it wasn't. It had been a murder, a cover-up. But why didn't anyone tell me? Hannah asked, her voice breaking. Why did I have to find out like this? Why didn't my mother ever tell me the truth? James looked away for a moment, his face hardening. They made sure no one told you. After your father's death, they covered everything up. They erased his involvement, erased any trace that could lead back to them. They made sure you and your mother believed it was just a tragic accident. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Her father hadn't been a helpless victim. He had been a threat to Amanda's family, and now she was a part of that same fight, unknowingly carrying on her father's battle. What happened to my father? Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible. How did they do it? James's expression darkened. Your father was framed for something he didn't do. They planted evidence, made it look like he was embezzling money from Amanda's family business. But the truth is, he was trying to stop them. He was gathering evidence, preparing to go public. That's why they had to get rid of him. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. They couldn't risk him exposing them. Hannah's mind spun as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. Her father had been trying to fight for justice, trying to take down the powerful people who had taken everything from her, and he had paid the ultimate price. She felt a wave of anger rise within her, mingled with an overwhelming sense of loss. She had never even known the full story. But what does this mean for me? Hannah asked, her voice shaking. What do I do with this information? How do I fight them? I'm just a maid. I don't belong in this world. I didn't even know any of this was happening. James stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. Hannah, you've already done more than you realize. You've helped expose the truth. You've already warned me. You're not alone in this anymore. We'll stop Amanda together. Hannah looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a spark of resolve. She wasn't the same woman she had been just days ago. She had learned too much, seen too much to turn back now. The fight wasn't just for her father's memory anymore. It was for her own future, for justice, for everyone who had been wronged by Amanda and her family. I'll do whatever it takes, Hannah said, her voice firm now, no longer trembling with fear. I want justice for my father. I won't let his death be in vain. James nodded, his face softening as he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I knew you were stronger than you thought. But as Hannah looked up at him, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something darker. Amanda was still out there, and she was more dangerous than ever. Hannah's mind raced as she realized that she wasn't just a witness to a crime anymore. She was involved, and her life, everything she had known, was about to change forever. As the days passed, James and Hannah continued their quiet investigation. They uncovered more about Amanda's illegal activities, and with each revelation the danger grew. Amanda had resources. She had power. and she had people willing to do whatever it took to protect her. Hannah couldn't help but feel like a target, her every move being watched. She spent sleepless nights pacing the floors of her new apartment, trying to make sense of everything. She couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda would come after her, that she would stop at nothing to silence the threat that Hannah represented. One evening, as Hannah sat in her apartment trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her head, there was another knock at the door. This time her heart skipped a beat. She knew it was coming, but it still sent a jolt of fear through her body. She opened the door cautiously, and standing there, in the dim light of the hallway, was a familiar face. It was Detective Martinez. Hannah stepped back, allowing Detective Martinez into the apartment. The tension between them had been building for days, and now, with him standing in her living room, she could feel the weight of their shared mission pressing down on her. Martinez closed the door behind him, his gaze scanning the apartment before locking eyes with her. "We've got a lead," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "But it's risky. We need to move fast before Amanda realizes we're closing in on her." Hannah's pulse quickened. "What's the lead?" "We have a chance to get into her family's estate. There's a safe there, hidden documents that could expose everything. It's the key to taking Amanda down for good, but it's not going to be easy." Martinez's face was serious now, his words hanging heavy in the air. Hannah's mind raced. She had come this far, warned James about the plot against him, and even helped uncover the web of lies and corruption. But getting involved in breaking into Amanda's family estate? That was a step into a much darker, much more dangerous world. "I don't know, Detective," Hannah said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "This is too much. Amanda won't just let us walk in there. If she finds out we're all dead." Martinez nodded, understanding her fear. "I get it. It's dangerous, but it's the only way to bring her down. We've been chasing shadows, but these documents, these files, they're the smoking gun we need. If we get them, we can prove her guilt once and for all." Hannah stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing on her. Her father's death, the lies Amanda had woven around her family, everything that had happened over the past few days. It was all coming to a head now. She couldn't back down. "I'll do it," Hannah said, her voice steady. "I'll go with you. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just walk in unprepared." Martinez's face softened with respect. "I knew I could count on you. You're stronger than you know, Hannah. We'll make sure we have a plan in place. We can't afford to make mistakes now." He handed her a small, carefully folded map of the estate. "This is the layout. The safe is on the second floor in the study. There's a hidden panel behind the bookshelf. We'll need to get in and out without anyone noticing." Hannah's heart pounded as she took the map from him. The estate was a fortress, and they were about to break into it. The thought made her stomach churn, but she had no choice. This was bigger than her now. It was about justice for her father, about bringing down Amanda's criminal empire once and for all. The next night, they drove out of the city. Hannah felt the tension build with every mile they put between themselves and the safety of the city. The estate was located in a remote area, surrounded by dense forest and a long, winding driveway that led up to the massive mansion. The air was thick with anticipation as they neared the estate. Hannah's palms were clammy, her mind racing through the plan Martinez had laid out. As they approached the gates, she glanced over at him. "Are you sure we won't get caught? Are there guards?" Martinez gave a small, reassuring smile. "There are, but they don't expect anyone to be coming in. We'll be in and out before they even know what happened." He slowed the car and pulled into a hidden spot off the road, out of view of the estate. As they got out of the car, the mansion loomed ahead, its darkened windows staring down at them like cold, empty eyes. Hannah felt a shiver run down her spine as they approached the gate. The estate was quiet, eerily so. There were no sounds of guards patrolling or lights flickering in the distance. It was as if the entire place was waiting for them. "Stay close," Martinez whispered, leading the way to the back of the estate. Hannah's breath came in shallow gasps as they moved through the overgrown vines and grass, carefully avoiding any noise that could alert the guards. When they reached the back door, Martinez pulled out a set of keys and silently unlocked it. The door creaked slightly as they slipped inside, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet inside. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and neglect. It was clear no one had been here in a while, and the silence felt oppressive. "We're in," Martinez whispered, motioning for Hana to follow him. They moved quickly through the hallways, sticking to the shadows, keeping their movements as quiet as possible. The study was on the second floor, just past a large staircase that creaked ominously under their weight. Hana's nerves were on edge as they reached the door to the study. Martinez paused, listening for any sounds on the other side. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes scanning the hallway. Hana nodded, swallowing hard. "Let's do this." They entered the study, and Hana couldn't help but feel the weight of the room. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and paper. The bookshelf was lined with leather-bound books, the spines gleaming in the dim light. Hana felt a shiver as she approached the shelf, her hands trembling as she ran her fingers over the books. "There," Martinez said, pointing to a small, inconspicuous latch hidden behind a book. He carefully removed the book and pressed the latch, causing a hidden panel to slide open with a soft click. Inside there was a small steel safe embedded in the wall. "This is it," Martinez said, pulling out a small tool to crack the safe. Hana stood watch, her heart racing in her chest. The seconds felt like hours as she waited, every sound amplified in her ears. She could hear her own heartbeat, the soft hum of the house, the occasional rustle of leaves outside. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Finally, with a soft click, the safe door swung open. Martinez quickly pulled out a stack of documents. "These are the files we need," he said, shoving them into his bag. "Let's get out of here." Just as they turned to leave, Hana heard footsteps approaching. She froze, her blood running cold. They were running out of time. "Go!" Martinez hissed, pushing her toward the door. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Hana's breath came in short bursts as they moved toward the exit. The tension in the air was suffocating, and every second felt like it could be their last. As they reached the back door, Hana's heart skipped a beat. The door swung open with a creak, and standing there, framed by the dim light from the hallway, was Amanda. Her eyes locked onto Hana's, cold and calculating, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Amanda's lips curled into a slow, sinister smile. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "It looks like the little maid decided to come play with the big players after all." Hana's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined this moment would come so quickly. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she tried to steady herself, but every instinct screamed at her to run. Martinez didn't move, standing protectively between Hana and Amanda. His eyes flicked toward the hallway, assessing their options. The tension in the air was thick. Amanda's presence was suffocating, like a predator cornering its prey. "We knew you'd try something like this," Amanda continued, her voice smooth as silk but with an edge that cut through the air. "You think you can just waltz in here, steal what you want, and walk out? You're not in control anymore, Hana. You never were." Hana's hands clenched at her sides, her mind racing. She knew they were outnumbered. She could feel the weight of Amanda's gaze, the subtle threat in her words. This wasn't just about the files anymore. It was about survival. "Get out of the way," Martinez said, his voice low but forceful. "We don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." Amanda laughed softly, the sound cruel and mocking. "And what do you think you're going to do with those files, huh? You really think you can take me down with a few papers? You have no idea what you're up against. You're in my world now." Hana's heart pounded in her chest. Amanda wasn't just dangerous, she was powerful, and she had no intention of letting them leave with the evidence. They had walked straight into a trap. "You're not leaving here," Amanda said, stepping into the room. "None of you are. Ryan, come in." At her command, the heavy footsteps of a man echoed from the hallway, and Hana's stomach twisted as she saw Ryan appear, his face hard and unreadable, a gun in his hand. His gaze flicked toward them, but he didn't speak. His loyalty was to Amanda. Hana could feel the coldness in the air as he raised the weapon, aimed directly at her. Hana's mind raced. They had no way out, no escape. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. The door was behind them, but they couldn't reach it in time. Every second felt like an eternity, and she was beginning to panic. But she couldn't let fear control her. Not now. She had come too far. Her father's death, the lies, everything that had led to this moment. It was all for this. This was her chance to stop Amanda, to bring justice for her father. "Ryan, you don't have to do this," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the terror she felt. "You're not loyal to her. You can still walk away. You can still make this right." Ryan's eyes flickered, a momentary flash of hesitation. But Amanda's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. "Don't listen to her, Ryan. She's just trying to manipulate you," Amanda hissed. "You know better than to fall for her tricks. Do your job." Ryan's grip tightened on the gun, but he didn't move. The room was frozen in time. Hannah could see the conflict in his eyes, the weight of the decision hanging heavy on him. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to kill anyone, but Amanda had him trapped. "Hannah's right," Martinez spoke up, his voice low but unwavering. "You don't have to do this. You don't owe her anything. This is your chance to get out. The only thing standing in your way is you." Ryan's eyes flickered between them, and for a moment it seemed like he might listen. But Amanda stepped forward, her voice icy with authority. "You think you can talk him out of this? You think you can convince him that it's all going to be okay?" Amanda sneered. "You don't understand. Ryan is one of us. He's my ally, and he always will be." The tension in the room was unbearable, each word hanging like a threat in the air. Ryan's hand shook, and his gaze shifted from Amanda to Hannah, then back to Amanda. Hannah could see the conflict within him, and it was growing. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He didn't want to be here. It was now or never. "Ryan," Hannah said, her voice firm but gentle. "You can choose to walk away from this. You don't have to keep following her. She's using you. If you help us, we'll make sure you get out of this. You don't have to be a part of her twisted game anymore." For a long, agonizing moment, Ryan didn't move. The gun was still pointed at Hannah, but the hesitation in his eyes grew more obvious. Amanda's grip tightened, and she took a step closer to him. "Don't you dare listen to her," Amanda hissed. "If you back down now, you'll regret it." But Ryan's hand trembled again, and finally it happened. Slowly, carefully, he lowered the gun. "I'm sorry," Ryan muttered, his voice barely audible. I can't do this anymore." The gun slipped from his hand, falling to the floor with a metallic clang. Amanda's face twisted in fury, her eyes flashing with rage. "You coward!" she spat. "You don't even know what you're doing." Before Amanda could react, Martinez lunged, grabbing her arm and twisting it behind her back with precise force. She let out a sharp scream, but Martinez held firm. "It's over, Amanda," he said, his voice cold. "You're done." Hannah stood frozen, staring at the scene unfolding before her. Ryan had turned. He had made the choice. He had chosen to do what was right. But the fight wasn't over. Amanda was still dangerous, still a threat. As Martinez secured her, Hannah knew they couldn't let their guard down. Not yet. The road ahead was still full of danger, but at least for now, Amanda was in their grasp. The tension was still thick in the air as Amanda struggled in Martinez's grip, her face contorted in rage. Her eyes shot daggers at Ryan, who stood motionless by the side, his expression clouded with regret and guilt. It was clear to Hannah that this wasn't over. Amanda might be restrained for now, but her anger could drive her to do anything. "Don't just stand there," Amanda snarled, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you've won? You think I'll just sit here and let you take everything I've worked for? I will destroy all of you." Martinez tightened his grip on Amanda's arm, forcing her to look at him. "It's over, Amanda. Your empire is crumbling. We have everything we need to bring you down. No more games." Hannah stood silently, still processing what had just happened. She had never expected things to escalate this far, but now that they had the files, there was no going back. Amanda's twisted web was finally unraveling, and Hannah's role in it had become clear. She wasn't just an innocent bystander anymore. She was fighting for justice, for her father, and for herself. "We need to get out of here," Martinez said urgently, his voice low and steady. "Amanda's men will be looking for her, and they won't hesitate to act if they know we've got her. We don't have much time. Ryan, still shaken, nodded in agreement. "Where do we go now?" Martinez glanced at the door. "We'll take her to a secure location. I'll call in backup, but we need to move fast." Hannah's heart raced as they quickly started moving toward the back door. They couldn't afford to stay here much longer. Every second they spent in the mansion made them more vulnerable to Amanda's men, who were surely on their way. She glanced at Ryan, who was now walking alongside them. He looked like a man who had just realized how deep he had been in, and how much he had lost by getting involved with Amanda. As they made their way to the car, Hannah could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had the evidence, Amanda's betrayal and her criminal empire, but the danger wasn't over. Amanda was still a threat, and so were her allies. She wasn't about to let them escape without a fight. They got into the car, with Amanda silently fuming in the back seat, her eyes narrowed, her lips curled into a sneer. Hannah could feel the tension, the anticipation of something bad lurking just beyond the horizon. Ryan was in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Hannah sat next to him, her mind racing. What would Amanda do once they got to the secure location? Would she try to escape, or worse, use her power to take them down? "We're not out of the woods yet," Martinez said, breaking the silence. "We need to get the files to the police, but even then, we're not guaranteed safety. Amanda has a lot of people in high places, and we don't know how far her influence goes." Hannah nodded, her thoughts swirling. She knew Martinez was right. Amanda had already proven how dangerous she was, and it wasn't just her that they had to worry about. There were still unknowns, people who might try to stop them from exposing Amanda's crimes. As they drove through the dark streets, Hannah couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. She had done what she needed to do. She had helped stop a dangerous woman from getting away with murder and corruption. But now she wasn't sure what her future would hold. What would she do once Amanda was behind bars? Could she ever really escape the legacy of everything that had happened? Ryan broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't want any of this. I was just in too deep and I didn't know how to get out." Hannah glanced at him, studying his face. She could see the regret in his eyes, but she wasn't sure if that would be enough. Could she forgive him for what he had done? For his part in the conspiracy? "We'll figure this out," Martinez said, his voice calm but decisive. "But first, we need to get Amanda to the police. That's our priority." They drove in silence for a few more minutes, the only sound the hum of the car's engine and the occasional passing of headlights. Hannah glanced out the window, watching the city pass by. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, her life had been so ordinary, working as a maid, trying to get by, never imagining that she would find herself tangled up in a plot that would change her life forever. "We're here," Ryan said, pulling into a secluded parking lot near an old warehouse. He killed the engine and looked over at Martinez. "You're sure this is safe?" Martinez nodded. "It's secure. The police will meet us here in a few minutes. We just need to hold on a little longer." They all got out of the car, with Amanda being escorted by Martinez. Hannah stayed close behind, her mind still spinning with everything that had happened. She had come so far, but it felt like the real battle was only just beginning. As they approached the warehouse, the sound of sirens in the distance sent a shiver down Hannah's spine. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing. This was the final step in a long journey. They had the evidence, they had Amanda in custody, and now all they had to do was see it through. The door to the warehouse opened, and a team of officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the group. Hannah's heart raced as she saw the familiar face of Detective Martinez, who gave them a nod of reassurance. "We've got this," he said, turning to Amanda with a cold smile. "Your time is up." Amanda's expression twisted in fury, but she remained silent as she was escorted further into the warehouse. The officers began to sort through the files, and Hannah took a deep breath, knowing that this was it, the moment she had fought for. Hannah turned to Ryan, her gaze steady but conflicted. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly. She still wasn't sure what his role would be in all of this, or whether he truly deserved redemption. Ryan didn't meet her eyes. "I just want out. I never wanted any of this, but I know what I've done. I know the consequences. I can't take it back. but maybe I can make it right. The air in the warehouse was thick with anticipation. The case was far from over, but at least now they had a chance to get to the truth, to bring Amanda and her family down for good. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with a sense of finality. Officers quickly took control of Amanda, who was being restrained, her face contorted with fury. Hannah watched the scene unfold, feeling an overwhelming sense of both relief and unease. She had come so far, but the journey was far from over. The files were in the hands of the police, and Amanda's empire was crumbling, but there was still the lingering question of what her future held. "Is everything ready?" Martinez asked one of the officers, his voice low and steady as he approached them. "Yes, we've got the files secured, and the team is ready to transport them to headquarters for further investigation," the officer replied, his tone professional but tense. Martinez nodded, satisfied. "Good. Make sure everything is handled properly. We don't want Amanda's connections interfering with this." Hannah couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The case was huge, and the fallout from exposing Amanda and her family would likely send ripples through the city, maybe even beyond. But Hannah wasn't worried about the consequences for her anymore. She had faced far worse, and this time, it was about making sure Amanda paid for everything she had done. Hannah turned her attention back to Amanda, who was still struggling against her restraints, her lips curled into a sneer. "You think you've won, don't you?" Amanda spat, her voice dripping with venom. "This is just the beginning. You'll regret crossing me." But Hannah didn't flinch. Amanda's words were empty, hollow threats. Hannah had seen the truth now. The woman before her was nothing more than a terrified animal, cornered by the truth. "You've already lost, Amanda," Hannah said, her voice calm but firm. "You're not in control anymore. The truth is out, and you're the one who's going down for it all." Amanda's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Hannah saw a flicker of something. Fear, perhaps. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced with a cold, defiant glare. Martinez motioned for Hannah to follow him to the side, away from the commotion. He spoke in a low voice. "We've done it. Amanda and her family are going to face charges that will bring everything to light. It's going to be a tough road, but this is a victory." Hannah nodded, her mind still racing. "I know, but I can't shake the feeling that something's still not right. It's like she's always 2 steps ahead." Martinez looked at her, his expression serious. "She's dangerous, Hannah. Don't let your guard down just yet. There are still a lot of people in her corner, people who will try to cover things up. But the evidence we've gathered is solid. It's just a matter of time." Hannah couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of doubt. She had thought the worst was over, but with Amanda's connections and her ruthless nature, she knew it was far from finished. The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. Hannah turned to see one of the officers approaching with a serious expression. "Detective, we've got something you need to see," the officer said, handing Martinez a folder. Martinez opened the folder quickly, his brow furrowing as he scanned the documents inside. "This can't be right," he muttered, more to himself than to Hannah. "We need to move fast." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "There's more," Martinez said, his voice low. "Amanda's family didn't just have their hands in one business. They've been running multiple fronts, all connected to international money laundering schemes. It's bigger than we thought." Hannah felt her stomach drop. "What does this mean? Are we safe?" "It means," Martinez said, looking up at her with a determined expression, "that we need to shut this down before it spirals further. If we don't act now, there's a risk that everything we've worked for will be buried, and we'll lose everything, including your father's legacy." Hannah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had thought they were done. She had believed that once Amanda was taken down, it would be over. But now, with this new information, she realized that the battle had only just begun. "We can't let them win," Hannah said, her voice firm with resolve. "We have to make sure the truth gets out, no matter the cost." Martinez nodded. "We'll do everything we can. But we need to be strategic. We can't rush into this. We'll need backup." Hannah's thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear in her mind. She wasn't going to stop until justice was served. Not for Amanda, not for her father, and not for the countless others who had been affected by this corruption. Back at the warehouse, the officers began preparing to transport Amanda and the evidence. Hannah watched as Martinez gave them orders, ensuring that everything was handled properly. She felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. They were on the cusp of exposing a massive network of crime, but the road ahead was dangerous, and she knew that Amanda would stop at nothing to get her revenge. Ryan was still standing nearby, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. Hannah couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. He had gone from a man complicit in Amanda's crimes to someone who now wanted redemption. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him, but she couldn't deny that he had made the right choice. "Are you okay?" Hannah asked him, her voice softer than she intended. Ryan looked at her, his expression conflicted. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I've done things I can never undo. But I can try to make it right. I can help you bring her down. I owe you that much." Hannah studied him for a moment, searching his eyes. She could see the guilt, the regret, but she wasn't sure if it was enough. She didn't know if she could ever fully trust him again. But for now, he was on their side. "I hope you can," she said, her voice steady. "We can't afford any more mistakes." As the officers began to load Amanda into the transport van, Hannah felt the weight of the situation sink deeper. The case was far from over, and Amanda's reach was still vast. But they had the files, they had the truth, and that was a start. Later that night, as Hannah sat in her small apartment, staring out at the city skyline, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that still clung to her. Amanda was behind bars for now, but something told her that this wasn't the end. There were still so many unanswered questions. But Hannah wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced down the truth, and no matter what came next, she was ready to fight. This was her fight, for justice, for her father, for everyone who had been affected by Amanda's corruption. And she wasn't going to stop. The next few days passed in a blur for Hannah. She kept her head low, trying to avoid drawing attention while waiting for the investigation to progress. The police were working tirelessly to sort through the evidence, but Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more lurking beneath the surface. Amanda's empire was vast, and every time she thought she had uncovered everything, new information seemed to surface. One evening, Hannah sat in her apartment, flipping through the files that had been collected. Her mind was consumed with the thought of her father. The mystery surrounding his death seemed even more tangled now that she knew about Amanda's involvement. The papers in front of her were a small consolation, proof that her father had been right about the corruption, but they didn't bring him back. They didn't undo the damage Amanda had caused. Suddenly her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a text from Martinez. "We need to meet. Things just got more complicated." Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly texted back, agreeing to meet him at the usual cafe in an hour. She knew that if Martinez was reaching out, it meant that the investigation had taken a turn. Something had changed. The cafe was quiet when Hannah arrived. The warm glow of the lamps provided a comforting contrast to the cold wind outside. She spotted Martinez right away, his usual composed demeanor replaced by an edge of tension. He was already waiting at a table near the back, a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched. "Martinez," Hannah greeted him, sitting down across from him. "What's going on?" He didn't waste any time. "Amanda's family isn't just involved in money laundering and fraud. We've uncovered a much larger operation, global trafficking, illegal weapons deals. Your father wasn't just framed for embezzlement. He got tangled in something much worse." Hannah's stomach twisted. "What are you saying? My father didn't just die because of a business deal gone wrong?" Martinez nodded. "No. Your father was trying to expose something much darker. His death wasn't an accident. He was murdered because he had information that could bring down Amanda's entire family. He knew too much about their criminal activities, and they had him killed to keep him quiet." Hannah sat back in her chair, reeling from the weight of his words. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture was far darker than she ever imagined. "We have to move fast," Martinez continued, his voice low. "We're not the only ones looking into this. Amanda has powerful allies in high places, people who don't want this getting out. If we don't act now, we'll lose our chance to take her down once and for all. Hannah's mind raced. What do we need to do? Martinez leaned in closer. We need to get the full scope of their operation. We need to expose the entire network. But Amanda's not going to let that happen without a fight. She's already made moves to cover her tracks, and she's not going to go down without using everything at her disposal to stay in control. Hannah clenched her fists, a surge of determination flooding her. Then we'll fight back. We've come this far. There's no turning back now. Martinez smiled faintly, a hint of approval in his eyes. I thought you'd say that. They spent the next hour going over the details, mapping out their next steps. Martinez had a plan to infiltrate the rest of Amanda's operation, and he needed Hannah's help. There were more documents to gather, more key people to question. They were going to use everything they had to take down Amanda once and for all. But Hannah knew that this would be the most dangerous phase yet. Amanda's network stretched far beyond anything they had anticipated. And now that they were this deep, there was no turning back. When Hannah returned to her apartment, the weight of the situation bore down on her. She had always thought that exposing the truth would bring peace. But now it felt like a war she had to fight alone, despite the allies she had in Martinez and Ryan. She didn't know who to trust anymore. There were too many people in Amanda's pocket, and too many questions left unanswered. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The sound of the city outside her window was a constant hum, but it was the silence in her own mind that kept her awake. She couldn't stop thinking about her father. She couldn't shake the image of his face, knowing he had been trying to expose something so dangerous. She had to honor his memory, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way. The next morning, Martinez called her again. We need to move. The files you've got are crucial, but we're running out of time. Meet me at the warehouse in an hour. Bring the evidence. We'll make the final push. Hannah agreed, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let Amanda get away with everything. Not now. Not after all they had been through. As Hannah prepared to leave, she glanced once more at the window, the city sprawling beneath her. It was a city full of secrets, and she was about to uncover them all. She had come this far, and nothing, no one, was going to stop her from exposing the truth. At the warehouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Martinez was already there, organizing the team. Hannah arrived carrying the evidence that could bring Amanda's empire to its knees. But as soon as she stepped inside, she noticed something was off. The officers who were supposed to be stationed here were nowhere to be seen. The warehouse felt eerily quiet. Too quiet. Martinez? Hannah called out, but he didn't respond. Her instincts kicked in and she stepped further inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The door slammed shut behind her. You didn't think you could just walk away, did you? Amanda's voice cut through the silence, sending a chill down Hannah's spine. Hannah turned to see Amanda standing in the doorway, flanked by two of her most trusted men. Hannah's blood ran cold. Amanda had somehow tracked them here. The trap had been set, and Hannah had walked right into it. You thought you could expose me, take me down, Amanda sneered, stepping into the warehouse. But you're nothing more than a pawn in my game. You should have stayed out of it. Hannah's mind raced. She had been so close. She had all the evidence, all the leverage they needed, and now it seemed like Amanda was about to snatch it all away. You don't have to do this, Amanda, Hannah said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. You've lost. The truth is already out there. Your empire is crumbling and no one can protect you anymore. Amanda's lips curled into a wicked smile, her eyes gleaming with a chilling, almost triumphant look. You still don't get it, do you? You think this is over? You think you've won? You have no idea what you're up against. My roots run deeper than you could ever imagine. You're playing a game with rules you don't even understand. Martinez made a move to approach, but in an instant, Amanda's men raised their guns, blocking his path. You're outmatched, Amanda mocked, her voice dripping with arrogance. You can't stop me. Not now, not ever. You're nothing but a distraction. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground, her eyes burning with resolve. The truth is on our side, Amanda, and no matter what you try, It's going to be the end for you. This game is over, and you're the one who's going down." Amanda's cold laugh echoed through the warehouse, sending a chill down Hannah's spine. "You think you've got the upper hand? I have more power, more influence than you could ever dream of," she said, her eyes narrowing as she stepped closer, her voice low and threatening. "You can't touch me." Hannah felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't back down. "You've been hiding behind your money and your lies for too long, Amanda," she said firmly. "But it's all coming down now. You're not invincible anymore. The people you've hurt, the lies you've built your empire on, they're coming to light." Martinez glanced at Hannah, his face grim but determined. "We have the evidence," he said, his voice calm despite the rising tension. "And we've already given it to the authorities. It's just a matter of time before they come for you, Amanda." Amanda's eyes flashed with fury, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You think you can just hand over a few documents and bring down my empire?" She scoffed, her voice dripping with contempt. "I've survived far worse than you could ever throw at me." One of Amanda's men stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "We've been preparing for this moment, and you're not going to win, Hannah," he said, his tone dark and foreboding. "You've got nothing left. This is where it ends for you." Hannah's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold, but she wasn't afraid. The moment she had feared was finally here, and she was ready to face it head-on. Without warning, she reached into her bag, where the evidence, the crucial files, were carefully hidden. She could feel the weight of it in her hands, the evidence that had the power to destroy everything Amanda had worked so hard to build. "We still have these," Hannah said, her voice unwavering. "This is the truth, and there's nothing you can do to erase it." Amanda's smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, her eyes now full of venom. "You think you can hold on to those documents? Do you really believe you can stop me?" Martinez took a step forward, positioning himself between Amanda and Hannah. "We've already sent copies of those files to the authorities," he said, his voice cold and determined. "It's already over, Amanda. There's no way out for you." Amanda looked between Martinez and Hannah, her eyes burning with anger. "You think you've won, don't you? But you haven't seen the worst of it yet. I have people everywhere. You won't even know what hit you." Hannah stood tall, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and defiance. "You've been playing this game for far too long, Amanda, but it's not going to end the way you think." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside the warehouse, and Amanda's face twisted in panic. "What's happening?" she demanded, her eyes darting to the door. "You think you can just walk away from me? You're making a mistake." Before anyone could respond, the doors to the warehouse burst open, and several police officers stormed inside, their guns drawn. Martinez nodded at them, signaling for them to move in. "It's over, Amanda," Martinez said, his voice firm. "You're under arrest for the crimes you've committed. You won't be able to hide anymore." Amanda's eyes widened in disbelief as the officers approached her, cuffing her hands behind her back. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice shrill with desperation. "I'll make sure you regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." As the officers led Amanda away, Hannah watched the woman who had caused so much pain and suffering being taken into custody. The weight in her chest began to lift, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the background. "Is it really over?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martinez gave her a reassuring nod. "It's over for her," he said. "The truth has come to light, and she'll face the consequences of everything she's done." Hannah stood in the middle of the warehouse, her body exhausted, but her spirit alive with the satisfaction of having fought for the truth. Amanda's downfall was just the beginning. The evidence they had collected would bring down not just Amanda, but her entire family's empire. As the police finished securing the warehouse, Hannah felt a quiet sense of triumph settle over her. She had exposed the lies, and the world would never be the same again. Later that evening, Hannah sat in her apartment, the city lights twinkling below her as she stared out at the skyline. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up, and a message from Martinez flashed across the screen. "You did it. We've won. The truth is out there, and no one can deny it anymore." Hannah smiled softly. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The fight was over, but her journey had just begun. She had faced her fears, fought for justice, and in the end, she had come out stronger. Hannah took a deep breath, knowing that this was only the beginning of her new life. She had honored her father's memory, exposed a powerful criminal empire, and reclaimed control over her own destiny. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to face whatever came next. The past was behind her, and her future was waiting. As Amanda was led away by the officers, the finality of the moment hit Hannah. The woman who had caused so much pain, fear, and chaos was finally being held accountable for her crimes. But even as Amanda's smug demeanor faded into the distance, something inside Hannah didn't feel like it was entirely over. She turned to Martinez, her thoughts still racing. Is it really finished? Is she really done? Her voice trembled slightly, as if questioning whether the fight they had just won was enough. Martinez gave her a soft yet firm look. It's over for her. The evidence we've collected will ensure she faces justice for everything she's done. The files are in the right hands now. But remember, Hannah, taking down one person doesn't end the entire network. There are still more people involved. Hannah's heart sank a little, but she understood. It wasn't just Amanda they had to worry about. It was the entire corrupt empire that she had built, and all the people who had supported her along the way. The end of Amanda wasn't the end of the danger. As the last of the officers filed out of the warehouse, Hannah stood there in the silence, trying to process everything. The sound of distant sirens echoed in the background, almost as if the city itself was still processing the weight of the truth being revealed. Martinez stepped closer, his expression serious. I need you to stay alert. There are still people out there who won't be happy with what we've done. And there may be some who will try to stop us before we can fully expose the extent of Amanda's family's operations. Hannah nodded, her mind still spinning. The reality of the situation was settling in now. She had fought for justice, but that fight was far from over. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She had become a key player in bringing down an entire criminal network. I'll stay ready, she replied, her voice steely. Whatever it takes, I'm in. The next few days were a blur. Hannah was no longer the same person who had been hiding in the shadows, cleaning rooms and staying out of the way. She was now in the heart of the investigation, helping Martinez and the police piece together the full story. She worked late into the nights, poring through evidence, reviewing files, and identifying connections that might have otherwise been overlooked. One night, as she sat at the table, her eyes heavy from exhaustion, Hannah's phone rang. She picked it up without thinking, her voice soft. Hannah speaking. It was a familiar voice, Martinez's. I need you at the station. We've got more to discuss, he said, his voice clipped with urgency. Hannah's stomach tightened. She stood up quickly, grabbing her jacket. The investigation had reached a critical point, and she knew that whatever was coming next was going to be the final push. There was no going back now. At the station, Martinez led her into a small, dimly lit room. The air inside was thick with anticipation. A whiteboard covered in names, dates, and arrows traced the connections between the various members of Amanda's family and their associates. Martinez pointed to a name on the board. This is Carl Moretti. He's been Amanda's main financier for years. He's helped her hide assets and launder money. We need him. He's a key figure in taking down the rest of the operation. Hannah studied the name, feeling the weight of what this meant. If they could bring down Moretti, they could unravel the entire web of corruption. How do we get to him? Hannah asked, her mind already working on the logistics. How do we convince him to turn on Amanda? Martinez smiled faintly. That's where you come in. We have information about Moretti's dealings. We just need to make sure he knows that we're onto him. Once he realizes he's cornered, he'll have no choice but to cooperate. Hannah's heart raced as she considered the danger of the situation. Convincing someone like Moretti to turn on Amanda wasn't going to be easy, and it would require all her courage. She hadn't come this far to back down now, though. She met Martinez's gaze. I'm ready. Over the next few days, they set their plan into motion. Hannah was in constant contact with the police, coordinating with undercover agents and preparing herself for a confrontation with Moretti. Every step was carefully calculated, but Hana couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone was always a step behind them, ready to derail their efforts. One evening, Hana was back at her apartment preparing to meet with Martinez when she received an unexpected visitor. She opened the door to find Ryan standing in front of her, his expression a mixture of guilt and determination. "Hana," he said, his voice quiet but urgent, "we need to talk." Hana stared at him for a long moment, unsure of what to feel. The man who had once been a part of Amanda's inner circle had now turned against her, but his presence here was unsettling. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to mask the anger and confusion she felt. Ryan took a deep breath. "I know I messed up. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I've realized that I've been used and I can't just stand by and let it all end like this. I need to make things right." Hana folded her arms, still skeptical. "And how do you plan to do that?" "I know more than I've told you," Ryan said, his eyes darting nervously. "I know about the deeper operations, the things Amanda has been hiding. I can help you take her down for good, but I need your trust." Hana's thoughts raced. She had always known that Ryan was just a pawn in Amanda's game, but now it seemed like he wanted to take control of his own fate. Still, could she trust him? "Why should I believe you?" Hana asked, her voice low. Ryan's expression softened. "Because I'm the only one who can get you the rest of the information you need. The stuff Amanda has locked away. I can get it for you, Hana. I can help you bring her down." Hana hesitated. The decision wasn't an easy one. She knew that relying on Ryan was risky, but without him, they would be stuck. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "Get me what you know, and if you double-cross me—" "I won't," Ryan interrupted, his voice earnest. "I swear I won't." The next few days were filled with planning. Ryan provided them with key information about where Amanda kept her most sensitive records, documents that could expose her entire criminal empire. But they had to act quickly. Amanda was getting desperate, and with every passing moment, the risk of failure grew. The night they were set to infiltrate Amanda's private estate, Hana felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. This was it, the moment that would determine whether they could completely dismantle Amanda's empire, or if they would all lose everything they had fought for. The estate was a sprawling mansion upstate, far from the city. As Hana and Martinez approached, the imposing structure loomed ahead of them. The house, dark and silent, seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for them to make their move. "This is it," Martinez whispered. "We get in, get the files, and get out. No mistakes." Hana nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back now. They made their way into the mansion under the cover of darkness, moving quietly through the corridors, careful not to alert anyone. The walls seemed to close in around them, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. When they reached the study, Hana's hands were shaking as she tried to focus. This was the moment. The files they needed to expose Amanda's empire, to finally bring her down, were within their grasp. But just as they began to access the hidden compartment in the wall, they heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps. Someone was coming. The sound of approaching footsteps sent a shiver through Hana. Her heart pounded and her breath caught in her throat as she turned to Martinez, her eyes wide with panic. "Someone's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Martinez's eyes darted to the door, and he motioned for her to stay quiet. His hand gripped the handle of his gun, but he kept it low, not wanting to make any noise. "Stay still, Hana," he muttered, his eyes sharp with focus. "We don't move unless we have to." Hana nodded, her fingers trembling as she stood motionless, barely breathing. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the hallway, making her pulse race. The tension in the air was thick, and every second felt like an eternity. The footsteps stopped just outside the study door. Hana's mind raced, her thoughts frantic. She could feel the weight of the files in her hands. Everything they had worked for was in that small compartment. If they were caught now, it would all be over. She could only hope they were hidden well enough to buy them a few more precious moments. "Do you think they've already found us?" Hana whispered, her voice barely above a breath, her mind reeling with the possibility that they had been outsmarted. Martinez's eyes stayed fixed on the door, his body tense, ready for anything. "We'll find out soon enough," he said grimly. The door creaked open, and a shadow passed through the doorway. Hana froze, her heart in her throat. She held her breath, praying that they wouldn't be discovered. A figure stepped into the room, and it wasn't who they had expected. It was Ryan, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. "Ryan," Hana whispered, her voice a mix of relief and confusion. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be outside." Ryan swallowed hard, his hands visibly shaking. "I didn't think I had a choice," he said quickly, his voice tense. "Amanda knows. She's coming. She's sending her men after us." Hana's stomach dropped. "How do you know this? Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I thought I could get in and out without her knowing," Ryan stammered. "But I heard her talking. She knows we found the files and she's already called backup. We're running out of time." Martinez looked at Hana, his expression hardening. "We need to move. Now." Without waiting for a response, Martinez grabbed the files from the compartment and stuffed them into a small, inconspicuous bag. He turned toward the door, his body tense as he moved with swift, controlled urgency. "Hana, stick close to me. Ryan, you stay behind and cover the rear." Hana's pulse was racing, but she nodded. "Let's go. We can't let her win." The three of them moved through the mansion's back hallways, sticking to the shadows. Every step felt like it might be their last, but they had no choice. Their only option was to keep moving. As they neared the exit, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Martinez held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. He pressed his back against the wall, and Hana did the same, her body trembling with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'll take care of them," Martinez whispered, his voice calm but firm. "You two get to the car. I'll catch up." Hana's eyes flicked between Martinez and Ryan. "No, we don't split up, we stick together." Ryan, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "He's right. You two need to go. I'll stay behind with him." Hana looked at him, still unsure. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I don't have a choice," Ryan said, his voice low. "I'm already in this deep. I'm not going to let you two face Amanda's people alone." Martinez placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, his expression grateful but serious. "Keep your head down and stay safe. We'll finish this. Just make sure you don't get caught." Ryan nodded, his face hardening. "Don't worry, I won't." With a final glance at Martinez and Ryan, Hana turned and ran toward the exit. Her legs felt heavy, each step feeling as though it might be her last, but she pushed through the fear. There was no turning back now. They reached the car just as the first sound of shouting came from the hallways. Martinez's voice rang out, calm and steady, as he confronted the men who were now entering the mansion. "Get in the car, Hana!" Ryan shouted, his eyes flicking nervously toward the doors. "We need to get out of here now." Hana jumped into the car, and as the engine roared to life, she glanced out the window, her heart sinking. She could hear the sound of footsteps growing louder, and the moment they pulled out of the driveway, she could see Martinez standing in the doorway, facing down a group of armed men. "Drive!" Hana screamed, her voice full of urgency. Ryan slammed the gas pedal and the car shot forward, speeding away from the mansion and into the night. Hana's heart pounded as she glanced back, but all she could see were the shadows of the mansion fading into the distance. "We did it," Ryan said quietly, his hands tight on the wheel as he kept his eyes on the road. "We got the files. We can end this. Amanda can't win." Hana didn't say anything at first. She couldn't. The weight of everything that had just happened was settling in. They had the evidence, but they were far from safe. She looked at Ryan, her mind racing. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "We take it to Martinez," Ryan replied. "He'll know what to do." They drove in silence for what seemed like hours, each of them lost in their thoughts. Hana stared out the window, watching the city lights blur by. It had been an exhausting, dangerous night, but they were almost there, almost free from the nightmare Amanda had created. The city's skyline finally appeared in the distance. Hana's heart sank a little as they neared the police station. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Amanda's downfall was coming, and they had the power to make it happen. The police station was bustling with activity when they arrived, officers rushing about as they secured the area. Martinez was waiting for them, standing by the entrance. "You made it," he said, his voice cool and composed. "Do you have the files?" Hannah nodded, her hand trembling as she handed the bag over to Martinez. "Everything's in there. Amanda's entire empire. Everything." Martinez took the bag and opened it, his eyes scanning the documents. After a moment, he looked up at them. "This is it. This will bring her down for good." "It's not over yet," Hannah said quietly, her voice full of resolve. "We still have to make sure she's arrested, that she faces justice for everything she's done." Martinez smiled faintly. "We will. But tonight we've taken the first step, and it's the most important one." With the files now in the right hands, Hannah knew there was no turning back. The battle wasn't over, but it was a fight she was no longer afraid to face. She had come so far, and she wasn't going to stop until Amanda and her entire operation were brought to justice. For the first time in years, Hannah felt a spark of hope ignite within her. The past had been a heavy burden, but now, with the truth finally in the light, she could begin to move forward. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was hers to walk, and she was ready for whatever came next. After handing over the files to Martinez, Hannah felt a small sense of relief, but she knew that the real battle was only beginning. The police station was abuzz with the flurry of activity as officers moved to secure their evidence and prepare for the next steps. Martinez led them into a back room where the files were already being processed. "This is where it gets tricky," Martinez said, his voice low, focused. "We have to act quickly. Amanda won't just roll over. She'll fight back, and her connections are deep. We need to keep her isolated before she can mobilize her people." Hannah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had the evidence to take Amanda down, but the path to justice was fraught with peril. If Amanda still had power, even a sliver of it, she could wreak havoc. "I won't let her get away with this," Hannah said, her voice firm. She wasn't just doing this for herself anymore. This fight was for her father, for justice, for all the people Amanda had hurt. The next few days passed in a blur. Hannah barely slept as she helped the team analyze the documents, cross-reference evidence, and prepare the case against Amanda. It felt like every moment was critical, and Hannah was determined to do whatever it took to make sure Amanda couldn't escape justice. Meanwhile, the news of Amanda's arrest spread like wildfire, and with it came a storm of media attention. Hannah tried to stay out of the public eye, knowing the last thing she needed was to become a target. But the more the press focused on Amanda's downfall, the more Hannah realized how much this case could change not just her life, but the lives of many others. People who had been too afraid to speak up, too afraid to expose the corruption, were finally seeing their chance. One evening, as Hannah sat in the safe house with Martinez, reviewing the latest updates, she received an unexpected call. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the caller ID. "Ryan." "Ryan," Hannah answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's going on?" There was a long pause on the other end, and Hannah could hear the faint sounds of traffic, a muffled voice in the background. "Hannah, you need to listen to me. I've made a huge mistake." Ryan's voice was shaky. "They know where I am." Hannah's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? Who knows where you are?" "I've been trying to get away from them, but Amanda's people are closing in on me. They're tracking me. I'm not safe anymore." Hannah's heart raced. "Ryan, you need to get to the police station, now. We'll get you protected." "No, Hannah, it's not that simple. They've already got eyes on the station. I can't go there," Ryan replied, his voice low and frantic. "They're coming for me. And if they find me, they'll find you too." Hannah's mind spun. Amanda had people everywhere, and now Ryan was in even more danger than before. This wasn't just about bringing down Amanda anymore. It was about surviving. "Where are you now?" Hannah asked quickly, already thinking of a plan. "Stay where you are. I'll get someone to help." Ryan gave Hannah a location, a dingy part of the city that was far from the usual surveillance, a place he thought he could hide in plain sight. Hannah turned to Martinez, who was in the room with her, listening intently. "We have to go after him," Hannah said, determination flooding her voice. "Amanda's people are closing in and we can't let them get to him." Martinez stood up, his face serious. "I'll send some backup, but we need to move fast. Get your things. We're going." The car ride felt endless. Hannah's thoughts raced with the possibility of what would happen if they didn't make it in time. They had already lost too many people to Amanda's grip. She couldn't lose Ryan now, not when he had chosen to help them. As they arrived at the location, Hannah could feel the tension thick in the air. The streets were deserted, the alleyways dark and foreboding. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, and Hannah couldn't help but feel like they were walking right into a trap. "Stay close," Martinez whispered as they stepped out of the car. Hannah nodded, her fingers trembling, but her resolve was strong. They were here to protect Ryan no matter what. The building Ryan had described was an old, run-down warehouse at the edge of the city. The walls were covered in grime, the windows shattered, and the air smelled of stale metal and neglect. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine as they approached the door, which had been left ajar. Inside, it was pitch black except for the flickering light of a lone bulb hanging from the ceiling. Hannah's eyes scanned the room, but there was no sign of Ryan. Her heart raced in her chest. "Ryan!" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. A low voice responded from the shadows. "Hannah." She turned toward the sound, relief flooding her as she saw Ryan emerging from the darkness, his face pale and drawn. "Ryan!" Hannah exclaimed, rushing toward him. "Are you okay?" Ryan's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "I'm fine, for now, but they've been watching me. They know I've been talking to you. They'll be here soon." Hannah grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the exit. "We need to get you out of here now." But just as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Hannah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, followed by a harsh, familiar voice. "Going somewhere?" Amanda's voice rang out, cold and venomous. Hannah's blood ran cold. The trap had been set, and they were the prey. Amanda stepped into the light, her eyes narrowed with malice, a cruel smile playing at the corners of her lips. Behind her were two of her most trusted men, both armed and ready for whatever came next. "You should have stayed out of it, Hannah," Amanda sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Now look where you are." Hannah's body tensed, her hands clenched into fists. "This ends now, Amanda. You won't win." Amanda chuckled darkly. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a maid, a pawn in a game much bigger than you." But Hannah wasn't about to back down. She had fought too long and too hard to let Amanda control her any longer. Martinez stepped forward, his posture calm but unyielding. "You've lost, Amanda. The evidence is out and you can't cover it up anymore." Amanda's smile faltered for a split second, but her confidence quickly returned. "I don't think you understand," she said coolly. "I have a contingency plan. You think you're the ones in control? You're playing my game now." Just then, the sound of sirens grew louder outside, and Hannah's pulse quickened. "It's over, Amanda," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "You've lost." The sound of sirens outside intensified, and Hannah's heart raced. They weren't out of the woods yet. Amanda's men were still inside the warehouse, and they were still heavily outnumbered. Hannah glanced at Martinez, who stood steady in the face of the looming threat. "Amanda," Martinez said, his voice cool but firm, "it's over. You're surrounded. Your empire is crumbling, and there's nowhere left to hide." Amanda's eyes darkened and her smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of desperation. "You think the police can stop me? You have no idea what you're up against." She turned to her men, signaling them to get ready. "Take them down. We'll deal with them later." The two men behind Amanda stepped forward, weapons drawn. Hannah's heart pounded as she instinctively backed away, positioning herself next to Martinez and Ryan. She could feel the weight of the danger pressing down on them. "We don't have much time," Martinez muttered under his breath, eyeing the two armed men. "Ryan, stay close to Hannah. I'll handle them." But before Martinez could take another step, the sound of more sirens grew louder. Hannah's hope surged briefly, but the reality of the situation still loomed over them. Amanda had too many people. They were still in a dangerous position. Amanda's laugh was cold, her confidence unwavering. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long," she said, her voice oozing with venom. "You should have just left well enough alone." Just then, the doors to the warehouse burst open, and a group of officers flooded in, their guns aimed at Amanda's men. Martinez's backup had arrived. "Hands in the air, now!" one of the officers shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. Amanda's men hesitated for only a second before raising their hands, realizing they were surrounded. Hannah breathed a sigh of relief as the officers quickly secured them, cuffing them one by one. But Amanda wasn't done. Her gaze turned sharp, eyes full of hatred. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice filled with loathing. "You're just getting started. I still have the power, the money, the connections. You'll never make it out of here alive." Martinez stepped forward, his posture unflinching. "You're done, Amanda," he said firmly. "All your connections, your power. It's over now. The truth is out, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Amanda glared at him, but she was visibly rattled, her bravado slipping. "You're just a pawn in this game," she sneered, eyes darting between Martinez, Hannah, and Ryan. "I will find a way to destroy all of you. You'll never be safe." Hannah, standing a few feet away, didn't flinch at Amanda's words. It was all bluster. She knew better than anyone that Amanda's reign was over. The files, the testimony from Ryan, and the evidence, they had everything they needed to bring her down for good. But Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda was right about one thing. The battle wasn't over, not yet. "Amanda," Hannah spoke up, her voice steady, "you won't win. It's done. Your empire is falling apart, and the truth is coming to light. There's no escaping that." Amanda stared at Hannah, and for the first time she seemed unsure. "You'll regret this," she muttered, her voice low and bitter. The police quickly took Amanda into custody, and within moments she was cuffed and led out of the warehouse by 2 officers. Her head was held high, her expression defiant, but there was no mistaking the fury in her eyes. She would never accept defeat. Hannah watched her disappear through the door, but a strange feeling lingered in her chest. This was the moment she had been fighting for, but it didn't feel as triumphant as she had imagined. Martinez turned to Hannah and Ryan, his face solemn. "This is only the beginning. We've taken down the head of the snake, but her network is vast. There are still people out there who will try to protect her." Ryan swallowed, his face grim. "I just want to be done with this. I don't want to be part of her world anymore." Hannah placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, giving him a reassuring smile. "You're not. You've done the right thing. We're done with her, for good." The rest of the night passed in a blur. Hannah, Ryan, and Martinez headed back to the safe house to regroup, but Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She knew they had won, but the weight of the situation felt heavy. They had been up against someone ruthless, someone who would do anything to maintain control. As they walked into the safe house, Hannah glanced at Ryan, who looked exhausted, his face pale. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Ryan shrugged, his eyes distant. "I don't know. I did what I had to do. I don't regret it, but I'm not sure I'll ever be the same after all this." Hannah nodded. "You won't be. None of us will. But we've made it through, and that counts for something." The next few days brought with them an avalanche of paperwork and meetings as Martinez and his team continued to build the case against Amanda. Hannah felt a strange sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. She knew they had exposed the truth, but she also knew that the ripple effects of their actions were far from over. On the 3rd day after Amanda's arrest, Hannah stood in front of a mirror, looking at herself. She didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. She had come so far, fought so hard, and now she was faced with a new life. The life she had wanted, the one she had been fighting for, was within her grasp, but there was a part of her that still felt lost. As she stared at her reflection, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, and for a moment Hannah hesitated. Who could it be now? She answered it, her voice tight. "Hello? Is this Hannah?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes." Hannah replied, confused. "This is Detective Martinez," the voice said. "We've got news. Amanda's trial is moving forward faster than we anticipated, but there's more. You're going to want to be there." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. The trial was starting? She had been so focused on the fight, she hadn't even considered what would happen when Amanda finally faced justice. "When is it?" Hannah asked, her voice steady despite the growing sense of anticipation in her chest. "Tomorrow," Martinez replied. "I'll have someone pick you up. It's time to make sure she pays for what she's done." The next day, Hannah stood outside the courthouse, her hands trembling despite her efforts to steady them. She had been here before, watching from the shadows, invisible to the world. But today it was different. Today she was no longer the maid who cleaned rooms for a living. Today, she was the woman who had exposed a dangerous web of lies, betrayal, and murder. Today, she was going to witness the downfall of the woman who had nearly taken everything from her. A black car pulled up beside her, and the door opened. Martinez stepped out, his usual calm demeanor in place, but there was something about his eyes that spoke volumes. He knew this moment would be pivotal, not just for Hannah, but for the whole world that had been unknowingly entangled in Amanda's corruption. "We're ready," he said simply, leading her toward the building. As they entered the courthouse, the atmosphere felt charged, as if everyone inside could feel the weight of the trial. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of muffled voices echoed off the marble walls. Hannah felt the stares of the reporters, the curious onlookers, all eager to get a glimpse of the woman who had managed to expose one of the most powerful families in the city. Her pulse quickened as they walked toward the courtroom. She didn't know what to expect. This was her first time being a part of something this high profile, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. They entered the courtroom, and Hannah's eyes immediately went to the defendant's stand. Amanda sat there, her once pristine appearance now a far cry from the confident, untouchable woman she had been. The high-priced designer suit she wore seemed out of place here, a stark contrast to the dullness of her surroundings. But her demeanor hadn't changed. She sat with her chin high, her eyes cold and calculating. Despite everything, she still believed she could control the situation. Hannah's stomach churned. She could feel the weight of Amanda's gaze on her, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid of her anymore. The trial began, and the tension in the room was palpable. The prosecution laid out its case, presenting the damning evidence, the financial fraud, the embezzlement, and the involvement in her father's death. Hannah sat silently, her heart heavy as each piece of the puzzle was revealed. She knew the truth, but seeing it all come to light in front of so many people, hearing it echoed in the voices of the lawyers, made it feel real in a way that nothing else had. The defense tried to discredit the evidence, casting doubt on the testimony, but it was clear that the case against Amanda was too strong. Martinez sat beside Hannah, occasionally glancing at her, giving her a reassuring look. She could feel his silent support, but the weight of it all was still overwhelming. Hours passed, and the courtroom drama continued. At one point, Amanda's lawyer tried to shift the blame onto others, claiming that Amanda was just a pawn in a larger game, forced into a life of crime by the people around her. But no one was buying it. The evidence was too clear, and Amanda's cold, calculated demeanor was too telling. Finally, it was Hannah's turn. She was called to the witness stand, and as she walked up, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She had been preparing for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. This was her time to speak the truth, to make sure Amanda could never hurt anyone again. As Hannah sat in the witness chair, she glanced at Amanda. The woman still held herself with an air of arrogance, but Hannah saw something else in her eyes now: fear. Amanda had never expected anyone to stand up to her, let alone someone like Hannah. "Miss," the prosecutor began, addressing Hannah, "can you tell the court what you overheard between Amanda Wilson and her accomplice?" Hannah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She recalled the moment with such clarity, as though it had happened just yesterday. "I overheard a conversation between Amanda Wilson and someone named Ryan," Hannah said, her voice steady. "They were discussing a plot to kill her husband, James Wilson, during a business trip. They spoke of making sure he never came back." She could hear the gasps from the audience. the murmurs of disbelief. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but she didn't speak. Hannah continued, her voice unwavering. I heard them plan his death, how they were going to make sure he was never a threat to them again. And it wasn't just a casual conversation. It was a deliberate, calculated plan to murder a man in cold blood. As Hannah finished, she could see Amanda's expression falter. The confident, untouchable mask was slipping, and Hannah felt a small sense of satisfaction. But the battle wasn't over yet. She had to stay strong. The defense lawyer tried to discredit Hannah, questioning her credibility. But Hannah stood firm. She had heard what she had heard, and no amount of questioning could change the truth. After what felt like hours of testimony, the judge finally called for a break. The jury would deliberate, and soon enough, the moment they had all been waiting for would arrive. Hannah, Martinez, and Ryan retreated to a quiet room to wait. The silence between them was heavy, but Hannah couldn't help but feel a sense of finality in the air. Ryan, who had been quiet throughout the trial, finally spoke up. You did it, he said, his voice hoarse. You brought her down. Hannah nodded, but the weight of it all still hung on her. She had done the right thing, but the cost had been high. She had lost her father, had seen her life turned upside down by Amanda's cruelty. But now, justice was within reach. As they sat there in the waiting room, Hannah's mind raced. What would the jury decide? Would they find Amanda guilty? And if they did, what would that mean for her future? Whatever happens, Martinez said, breaking the silence, you did the right thing. You've brought down a dangerous woman. No one will ever be the same after this. The door to the room opened, and one of the officers stepped in, looking at them with a somber expression. The jury has reached a verdict, he said, his voice tense. It's time. Hannah stood up, her legs feeling weak. This was it, the moment of truth. The courtroom was even more crowded than before as they returned. The jury was seated, their faces unreadable. Amanda sat stiffly in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap. Hannah took a deep breath as she stood beside Martinez, waiting for the judge to speak. We, the jury, find the defendant, Amanda Wilson, guilty on all charges, the foreman said, his voice clear and final. The room erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest, but there was a sense of relief now. Amanda had been held accountable for her actions. As Amanda was led away in handcuffs, Hannah finally allowed herself to breathe. The long journey was over, and justice had been served. She had fought for the truth, for her father's memory, and for herself. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Amanda's trial continued, with more of her criminal empire unraveling as the truth came to light. But for Hannah, it was the beginning of a new chapter. She was no longer the woman hiding in the shadows, waiting to be invisible. She was now a woman of strength, of resilience, and of courage. As Hannah sat in her new apartment, gazing out at the New York skyline, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She had fought for justice, and she had won. And for the first time in her life, she could look ahead to a future she had earned.